What is the creepiest historical fact? In WW1 there was a Hungarian man that said he was stocking up on oil and was sent off to war. His townspeople needed it and opened up the cans to find several dead women in there. Apparently he also tried to suck their blood and he was never seen again. Edit. Holy carp, thanks for all the upvotes. I should also mention the guy's name was Bella Kiss, and I'll put a link to a Wikipedia article if you want more info. Wiki article. In the past, people used mummies for everything from medicines to colors to paint with. There was even a tonic to drink that had ground up mummies as part of the ingredients. As for painting, the color was called mummy brown. It became in such high demand that, in some instances, the remains of executed criminals were mummified and used to satiate the demand of artists. I live in a city named Halifax in the province of Nova Scotia, Canada. During the potato famine in Ireland, thousands of immigrants would land here first before heading on to other parts of Canada. Many did not survive the crossing, so mass graves were dug. One day workers who had been loading bodies into these graves went to lunch and upon their return found one person had crawled out. The Leatherman was an individual who would walk the same 360-mile route between the Hudson and Connecticut rivers approximately every 30 days for 30 years. He was named Leatherman because of the hand-sewn leather clothes he wore and the fact that he never spoke to anyone other than shopkeepers for supplies and would never divulge anything about his past. He is believed to be French or Quebecois because a French Bible was found on him when he died. When his grave was recently exhumed to test his DNA, no remains were found. Male mummies are found to better preserved because female bodies were not sent for embalming right after their death for the fear of necrophilia. The Little Albert experiment, one which aimed to find if fear was ingrained in our brains or taught by parents. A baby was shown various things: puppies, rabbits, rats, masks, burning newspapers, etc. Being a child, he had no reaction to any of them. Following this, he began presenting soft, fluffy things to the child while slamming a gong with a hammer from behind a curtain to scare the child. The child developed a phobia of white, fluffy things. The experiment ended because this child he was kidnapping from the daycare on his campus had moved away with his mother. Chances are Little Albert is still alive and psychologically fucked as a result of this experiment. Cleopatra was the product of 4 consecutive generations of brother-sister marriages. The first emperor of China, Shi Huangdi, wanted to live forever, so he was looking for the elixir of immortality. His doctors were given a choice: find it or die. Anyhow, soon he discovered a liquid that is considered to be it. Thus he drank it daily, not knowing his magical liquid was actually mercury and it was slowly poisoning him. He died of mercury poisoning. This guy, I think his last name was Jesty, saw that milkmaids were not getting the smallpox way back when. He believed it was because they had all gotten the cowpox earlier in life. To prove this, he got some pus from an infected cow and paid a guy to infect his son. He infected him by using a small lance to insert the pus into the poor kid. After the kid was through with cowpox, this Jesty guy exposed him to smallpox, which killed or disfigured you at the time. All to which this kid's dad was like, "I don't care, you paid me." Well, that kid didn't get sick, and so the first vaccine test was conducted. During Pope Gregory IX's term, he declared that cats were associated with devil worship, which led to their massacre. Edit. Damn. I never knew I would get so much upvotes for this comment. Zhang Xianzhang, also known as Yellow Tiger, was the leader of a 17th-century peasant revolt which conquered the Chinese province of Sichuan in the end days of the Ming dynasty. There he lived the life of a warlord, in constant battle, and eventually descended into madness and barbarism, wherein he turned upon his own people in merciless slaughter. He would pile the heads, hands, ears and noses of those he had killed, so as to better keep count of his murders. In Chengdu, there was erected a stele to commemorate his murders. It has come to be known as the 7-kill stele. And read, "Heaven brings forth innumerable things to nurture man. Man has nothing good with which to recompense heaven." Not really creepy, more like gross. One of the King Louis, his servant, said that he had so much lice that when he would eat, clumps of lice would just fall onto his food. Apparently washing your hair was unhygienic back then. Edit. I'm so sorry guys. I don't know much about lice or medieval times. Or which king it was. This was just something I heard from several people and I never thought it was fully true. I thought it was something I could share on this question. Again, I'm so sorry and just wash your hair. People. I find the killing fields of Cambodia to be very disturbing. Pol Pot murdered a huge percentage of his country through starvation and of course execution. There's lots of info on this if you are interested. Late to the party. But Ctrl+F doesn't show it yet. So let's add this to the list. In the early 1990s, the city of Herxheim, a small community in the very west of Middle Germany, built a new industrial park or something like that. They found the remains of a Neolithic village that used to house between 80 and 100 people and was dated to about 5000 BC. As they dug further, they began finding graves nearby that were laid out in a ring around the settlement. It was already noticed then that there were a surprising amount of bones buried. Things started getting really interesting when a couple of years later a French archaeologist took a closer look at the bones. He removed the calc sinter that had layered on the actual bones. Underneath he discovered cut marks. Since then he and other archaeologists have compared the condition of the bones to those found in slaughterhouses by ancient slaughter sites. At the same time, the bodies did not show any evidence of unusual malnutrition or pre-mortem violence, as it would be to be expected with enemies having been killed or taken prisoner in battle. The bodies of the individuals buried around Herxheim seem to have been professionally dismembered and defleshed. Many of the large hollow bones having been split open, presumably to recover the marrow. There is still no absolute proof of cannibalism having taken place in some, especially local, archaeologists are very reluctant to agree to that theory. If the flesh of the buried individuals has actually been consumed, it would be possible to trace human myoglobin in the latrine sites, which have yet to be found. But then again, that industrial park has been built since then. But it gets more interesting. Altogether, about half of the presumed ring around the settlement has been unearthed so far, with more than 450 skulls of both genders and all age groups having been recovered. Many of those seem to have been mutilated in a specific way, basically taking the top off the skull. Equally common are front teeth blackened by fire, which is a telltale sign of a head having been in close contact with fire while still somewhat fresh. The lips curl up as they burn, exposing the teeth in the front, while the cheeks protect the ones deeper in the mouth cavity. What is missing in many places are small bones, fingers and such, which some archaeologists see as evidence of reburial. People having died, buried somewhere else, unearthed and then being brought to Herxheim for their final resting place. But then again, those might also get lost in the process of cannibalizing a body. Along with them, plenty of artifacts have been found, mostly ritualistically destroyed, as it is common for burial objects. Cups, bowls, tools and such also provide another puzzle piece. Their different styles usually provide archaeologists with the ability to locate their origin. And the items found in Herxheim come from literally all over the place. Some of the objects seem to have been brought to the site from more than 400 kilometers away, and not just from one but from several locations. West, north and east of Herxheim. Even more curious was the result of a strontium-8786 analysis. The half-life of those isotopes in the teeth enamel of individuals basically allows to tell in which geological region somebody spent their life. Now, at the time of the Herxheim settlement, there were two predominant cultures in Western Europe: the Band ceramic people and the Mesolithic people. The further settled in the valleys and had more of an agricultural lifestyle. The latter were more semi-nomadic and preferred the mountain ranges. We know that they coexisted, and it is to be assumed that there was interaction. But as far as I am aware of, thus far there is no evidence of that. Well, more than 50 of the individuals buried at Herxheim were Mesolithic people. Given the fact that about 450 plus skulls have been found in half the ring surrounding the settlement, it is to be assumed that altogether there are probably around 1,000 individuals buried there. Which, even if you'd assume the Herxheim people were cannibals, is quite a lot to eat for only 100 people. Even more bizarre is what the C14 analysis reveals. Archaeologists estimate that all those bodies were buried within a timespan of 50 years. But since that is about as precise as C14 goes, it might also have only been a few weeks. Edit. All of this likely happened somewhere between 5000 B.C. and 4950 B.C., which is about the time when the decline of the banned ceramic culture all over Europe becomes very inevitable until it completely ceases to exist in around 4900 B.C., if I am not mistaken. The cause of the disappearance of that culture, which, in its various characteristics, spanned all over Europe and part of modern-day Russia, is thus far unknown. Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique was written by him for the woman he was relentlessly stalking and harassing. His idea was to basically reveal to her that he had written it for her after she attended the performance, which he had pressured her into attending. Somehow, that shit worked. And I believe they married. Don't believe the marriage lasted. They literally did not speak the same language. The Raft of the Medusa. In 1816, France sent a ship called the Medusa to go reclaim the French African colony of Senegal. The captain was appointed based on politics rather than merit. Captain Dumbfuck ended up running the ship onto a sandbar and refused to dump the cannons in order to make the ship light enough to get back into sea. The giant raft they built to hold the ship's cargo was eventually used to float the 147 people who couldn't fit onto the lifeboats. The idea was that the lifeboats could tow the raft to shore. The lifeboat folks, including Captain Dumbfuck and the governor, decided to cut off the raft and leave everyone for dead while they sailed to land. After 2 weeks, there were only 15 men left alive on the raft, and boy, did they have a story to tell. Genghis Khan has roughly 16 million descendants. Edit. I looked it up. That's 16 million male descendants. Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler. It's said that when he impales the Ottomans, he'd use a stick with a dull tip to impale them from the anus through the mouth straight up. And from what I've heard, he used sticks that has dull tips because it would push the organs aside rather than stabbing through. So they won't just die right away, but they would have to suffer painfully. I can't imagine being a soldier marching through a forest of my comrades moaning in pain, knowing that if I make one mistake, I would end up with them suffering their fate. One of the creepiest events I tell students in my Western civilizations class is the ecclesiastical trial of Pope Formosus around 875 AD. This event was called the Synodus Horrenda, also known as the Cadaver Synod. Formosus had been dead for 7 months. But the new pope, Pope Stephen VI, found it necessary to exhume Formosus's body and bring it to the papal court to answer for accusations of perjury and exceeding the papacy illegally. Granted, the Catholic Church has gone through many strange things over the course of its history. However, this event always gets a reaction, especially when the Jean-Paul Laurens painting is shown. Madame Delphine LaLaurie was a wealthy socialite in New Orleans, Louisiana, who happened to be a most disturbing sadist and serial killer with a secret torture chamber in the attic. She tortured and killed her servants and was found out because of a fire that started in her house. Ever wonder what happens if you crash into a wall at 185 miles per hour head-on? Gordon Smiley's 1982 Indy 500 qualifying crash is exactly that. Dr. Steve Olvey is the source of this account. While rushing to the car, I noticed small splotches of a peculiar gray substance marking a trail on the asphalt leading up to the driver. When I reached the car, I was shocked to see that Smiley's helmet was gone, along with the top of his skull. He had essentially been scalped by the debris fence. The material on the racetrack was most of his brain. His helmet, due to massive centrifugal force, was literally pulled from his head on impact. I rode to the care center with the body. On the way in, I performed a cursory examination and realized that nearly every bone in his body was shattered. The Hittite law book has a disturbingly long list of sex crimes. Some highlights include over 10 different kinds of bestiality with punishment depending on the kind of animal and who topped, and necrophilia, which was 100% legal. Probably not the creepiest but still disturbing. Japanese warriors during many battles used to behead enemy generals, higher-ups, and present it to their lord, general at dinner as an entertainment after winning the battle. 3 sailors survived the sinking of the USS West Virginia at Pearl Harbor, only to die 16 days later, due to the lack of air. The Navy knew they were there, but couldn't get to them. Mollified man, human mummy confection, is a thing. A person who would eat drink, and bath in honey until, after a month, his excreta are nothing but honey, then death ensues. Then said person is shut in a sarcophagus for 100 years steeped in honey. This honey was then sold off for its medicinal uses. So there's a legend my grandfather would read to us as children about a guy called Sonny Bean. I assumed it was bollocks. But turns out there is likely some truth in it. Sonny was the head of a clan in Scotland in the 16th century. Essentially, he and his wife Agnes had 6 daughters. 8 sons, then a load of grandkids who were the product of incest. Anyway, lacking the inclination to work, Sonny and his family began raiding local villages and travelers for money and supplies. The clan would bring the bodies back to the cave where they kill, dismember and eat them. They pickled the leftovers and put them into storage. The locals noticed many people going missing at night, and would frequently search for the culprits. They reputedly even found the cave where the Beans lived but didn't think it was inhabitable. The story goes that innocent people were lynched for the murders. Over the years, the locals looked for Sonny's clan. They were eventually caught when they tried to ambush a newly married couple traveling down a road. They caught and murdered the wife. But the husband managed to fight them off with his sword and pistol before being saved by the wedding party who were traveling on the same road. The king, James VI, probably ordered a posse to be formed of 400 men, and with the assistance of bloodhounds they found the cave. Apparently they found body parts hanging from the walls, barrels filled with pickled organs, jewelry from thousands of victims. They say Sonny was taken first to Edinburgh, then Glasgow, where he was killed without trial, as he was deemed subhuman. Sonny and his fellow men had their genitalia cut off and thrown into the fires, their hands and feet severed, and were allowed to bleed to death, with Sonny shouting his dying words, "It isn't over. It will never be over." After watching the men die, Agnes, her fellow women, and the children were tied to stakes and burned alive. It is claimed they may have killed up to 5,000 people, but with record-keeping being fairly poor back then, and the clandestine way the clan operated, it's hard to know. Either way, lovely legend to tell to a child, and possibly based in truth. The assassin of U.S. President James Garfield, Charles J. Guiteau, had a long history of priapism and phimosis. This resulted in chronic pain because his foreskin was so tight that it would not and could not retract normally. A group of doctors claim the severe pain led to a form of insanity that led him to kill the president. At Guiteau's autopsy, he was found to also have an advanced case of balanitis and balanoposthitis with a significant accumulation of smegma. Go figure. A dirty dick killed a president. In 1944, a plane carrying 6 American airmen crashed into the ocean near Chichi-jima, in the Bonin Islands, which at the time was occupied by the Japanese. 5 of the men were close enough to swim to shore, but the 6th was separated from the group and flung out farther into the ocean. The 5 that made it shore were quickly captured, executed, and partially cannibalized by the troops occupying the island. The 6th man was rescued and brought back into Allied care. That man was George H.W. Bush. The Japanese hell ships packed prisoners in ships' small spaces like sardines. Locked them in for days. No room to sit, or go to the bathroom. And nothing to eat or drink. Led to those that went insane being killed by fellow prisoners, cannibalism, and drinking their blood due to extreme thirst. The Forgotten Highlander book describes the events in great detail. Machete Season book. During the spring of 1994, in a tiny country called Rwanda, some 800,000 people were hacked to death, one, by their neighbors in a gruesome civil war. Several years later, journalist Gene Hatzfeld traveled to Rwanda to interview 10 participants in the killings, eliciting extraordinary testimony from these men about the genocide they perpetrated. Turns out it started on a Sunday afternoon following church, where they were told later that day to initiate the killings of their friends, families, neighbors, and even those in church, Christian, with them that day. When asked how they knew who was Hutu and who was Tutsi, the answer was that they grew up with them, so already knew who to kill. Best summary of both are Jocko's podcasts episode 12 and 16. In 1794, when French revolutionary Maximilien Robespierre realized he was to be executed, he attempted suicide by shooting himself in the mouth. He was unsuccessful. And when they took him to the guillotine, the executioner ripped off the bandage holding his wounded jaw together, causing him to scream in agony before the crowd until he was silenced by the blade of the guillotine. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.